Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order, and we'll start off with a roll call. Mrs. Sugars?
Mr. Goodwin,
Here.
Mrs. Judge,
Here.
Mrs. Matlack,
Here.
Mrs. Seidel,
Here.
Mrs. Scarpolino,
Here.
Mrs. Schultz,
Here.
Mr. Tomlinson,
Here.
Dr. Wong,
Here.
Dr. Dickinson.
Okay, let's now stand and for the Pledge of Allegiance. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start off with public discussion. There will be two opportunities for public discussion this evening. The first public comment session is on the agenda items only. There will be another public comment section for any topic at the end of the meeting. If you would like to speak now, please identify the agenda item you would like to discuss, speak into the microphone clearly and state your name and address. Each speaker will be given a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. The timer in front here, the timer light will be green at the beginning of the 3 minutes, and the timer will turn yellow when there's 30 seconds left to speak. When the timer turns red, your time is up. Please conclude your comments. Are there any comments on any of the agenda items?
Hi, my name is Brian Everett of 15 East Miami Avenue. I would like to speak in reference to agenda item C.
C?
Yes. So I'm here this evening not as a parent, but as a resident of Cherry Hill Township, and most importantly as an alum of the Cherry Hill Public School District. Even more significantly to my personal backstory is that I'm an alum of Kingston Elementary, Carusi Middle School, and Cherry Hill High School West, all while Dr. Malash served as principal for each school. Dr. Malash has continued to be a fantastic mentor for myself, even long after I graduated from High School West, all the way back in 2011. I currently work as an assistant dean at my collegiate alma mater, and I attribute so much of my collegiate and professional success to Dr. Malash's tenure in Cherry Hill Public Schools. I highly encourage the Board of Education to approve of Dr. Malash's contract extension this evening due to how dynamic of an educational leader he has always been for Cherry Hill. Dr. Malash, as you all know, has helped the district to achieve many educational milestones over the years, but it is important for me to bring attention to his ability to be ever present in our school and township communities. During times of loss, he was there to console students and families, and he was there because he genuinely wanted to be there for people. During times of feud, he was there to settle arguments and rebuild friendships. During times of uncertainty as a nation or township, he calmed entire rooms with relative ease. He mentored many of my goofball friends who would get caught smoking cigarettes on Senior Hill, and I might add that none of them ever picked up the habit for good. These examples of Dr. Malash's leadership and empathy do speak for themselves. Additionally, I'm also a member of the Young Alumni Board for Cherry Hill Public Schools. Under Dr. Malash's leadership, we have developed several new initiatives to create professional mentoring experiences for graduating seniors in Cherry Hill for when they return home from college. As someone who is responsible for teaching leadership, professionalism, and networking skills to college students, I envision these professionalization and networking initiatives proving to be 21st century examples to follow in public education. as the school district looks to build the community's 2020 plan. I cannot envision adequate success as a township without Dr. Malash's proven efficacy. Thank you. Right on time, by the way, too.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening, Miriam Stern, 121 Ashford Road. Just a quick comment on items C and E. I hope I looked through them quickly enough to comment correctly. I'm just a little confused as a parent about the 2-year, I guess, or year and a half, extending a contract so early on before it expires. I just don't understand the board's process, especially as we're looking ahead. So what's in front of us much more quickly is the teacher's contract, and especially given the challenges we had with negotiating the teacher's contract last time, it's just confusing to me why the emphasis is put on this now. So that's one of my comments and a concern as a parent. And the other concern is about the 2020 vision, which I believe is item E. I think it's a really important start. Facilities are fundamentally have a huge impact on our education and our students, and it's something that I constantly hear parents comment about at every level from all the schools that their kids are involved with or that they go to. But I think there has to be a lot more of a broader approach to a long-term vision. Vision is what we're striving for, and it should encompass multiple areas. So, I think I think the board and the administration did a lot of work on the vision, and I think it's really important. I think we have to do a lot more, and I think there has to be issues addressed in the vision that are broader, that are more long-term, that have to do with improving overall the efforts to help the achievement gap, as well as giving opportunities for innovation in learning. I see great innovation throughout the district, but it's in pockets. And I don't see necessarily a cohesive approach to how are we going to prepare our students for what the future is going to bring with employment at all levels, which again, I think that would help with the achievement gap. If you're really bringing new, really what the future of the workforce is going to be, I think technology is such a huge part of that. I'd love to see more emphasis on STEAM, and I think that all of the, I think girls and boys from all parts of the district would really benefit from that. There's so much going on with innovation. I don't understand why that's not part of our vision, and I see other districts, and I look at around in the Mid-Atlantic area and what they're doing for their vision, and there's multiple areas that are being addressed. So I'm concerned about that, and I think what relates to that to me, and how does the district achieve anything, is with money. I think it's I think the bond is a huge step towards that, but I think fair funding has to be a much larger part of the discussion, because fair funding is sustainable, a bond is not. So I really would hope that fair funding becomes a more prominent part of the conversation. I keep trying to listen to when I'm hearing it, and I'm not hearing it as much as I'd like to. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on items on the agenda? Okay, if not, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Malash for some student recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. So I'm very excited tonight to present to the board for recognition a number of our students representing different positions from East Side, the student publication at High School East, for their achievements in the NSPA/JEA awards. So I'm going to ask Mrs. Wilson to join me up at the podium. We have some certificates. And students, as you come up, Mrs. Wilson will read your names. You're going to come up. I'm going to hand you a certificate. If anybody wants to take pictures, you're more than welcome to take pictures. Students, we're going to have you come around and shake hands with the board members and the administrators. After you do that, we're going to have you head out this door. Then Mrs. Wilson's going to get a picture of you all in the hallway with Mr. Gagliardi after we finish doing that. You are all welcome to come back and spend the rest of the meeting with us. You do not have to go, but you do not need to feel obligated to come back either, okay? All right, Mrs. Wilson, ready?
So, as Dr. Malaj said, we are recognizing staff members for their achievements in the national competition. And Mr. Gagliardi, would you like to say a few words about that competition before we hand out the certificates?
We're actually all here because we heard it was School Board Appreciation Month. The East Side stuff is a coincidence that they're also being recognized for that reason. So thank you, School Board. We're appreciating you. We went to the National High School Journalism Convention as we have for the past 5 years. This year it was in Dallas. Next year it will be in Chicago. We were very successful. We had our biggest group. We had 30 members of our 32-member editorial board attend, and we had many awards. And the awards that are being given today were those who achieved above honorable mention. That was the criteria. We had, do you want me to go according to what you have written here? Or do you want me to just say other stuff? We had, in 3 different categories, we found out we were finalists in 3 different categories, which we knew this summer. And when we got to the event, we found out exactly what place they took. 2 of those 3 categories are represented here. The other one took honorable mention, but even honorable mention means that you got 6th through 10th in the country. So even that honorable mention award is a big deal to us. And since they're not getting an award here, I did want to bring attention, that was for vaping coverage. We have all these multimedia packages online, which is a combination of stories, audio, video, interactive features, and we had 2 different ones in the same category that were top 10. And that never happened for us before, and I talked to someone at the convention, they don't think that's ever happened for a high school in the same category before. So we're really happy about that. It was a great trip even outside of the awards, a lot of good experiences in Dallas and in the various sessions we attended, and we're already looking forward to next year. So thank you all for approving this trip year after year, and hopefully we'll continue to make you all proud. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we will start with the awards for 3rd place in the NSPA Multimedia Feature for the Ragtime coverage. We have Sari Cohen. Nafisa Jagadar. Alana Araghetti. Hope Rosenblatt. Luke Shin, who I don't believe is here. Louis Zimmerman. And then we have another award for Sari Cohen for the Superior Rating in Broadcast News Writing for the JEA Write-Offs Competition. And Hope gets to go around again as well for excellent rating in review writing for the JEA Write-Offs Competition. And Claire Johnson, excellent rating for commentary writing, JEA Write-Offs Competition. Okay. And then in another category, we have Sabrina Dabro, 4th place National Cartoonist of the Year. Then we have our 2nd seed finishers in the National High School Journalism Quiz Bowl, Harry Green, Jacob Kernis, Ji Seon Lee, and Joshua Pipe.
sorry. And also for the National Journals and Quiz Bowl, the team that just got announced, they were our top seed. They were second in the country. But of the top 16 seeds, we had 4 teams qualify for the top 16. And it actually turned out that one of our teams had to go against one of the other teams. So we're really happy about that also. I want to also thank Matt LeGroux, our vice principal for English, who came here to support our endeavor. And of course, Josh, who's one of our own, who's on your board.
I did not shake hands, though. You guys are going to Ms. Wilson's do a picture out in the hallway. Okay? Congratulations, guys. Folks, when Mr. Gagliardi was at the microphone, we congratulate all of the kids, Mr. Gagliardi and Eastside. They do a phenomenal job of what they produce, honestly, at times on a daily basis, in terms of how they cover what's going on, not just over at High School East, but in the community as well. Our 2 student board reps who are here tonight, even though we do not have regular board presentations, as Mr. Gagliardi mentioned, January is School Board Recognition Month. So Carly and Josh just have brief statements that they would like to share about the board. So Josh, would you begin for us, please?
Esteemed members of the board, I have a few comments I'd like to give in honor of School Board Recognition Month. First, I would like to thank everyone here for giving me the honor and the privilege of interacting with you on a regular basis. As someone who has always been in awe of the power of democracy at both the national and local levels, having the chance to watch ideas like the Cherry Hill 2020 plan develop and new policy be passed has been significant for me personally. I'll remember this experience for the rest of my life. However, my gratitude tonight is on behalf of the entire Cherry Hill community. Although there are times that the public is not satisfied with the decisions or responses of this board, our town owes you so much for the time, effort, and thought put in by all members here in directing our schools forward. The choice to run and serve our town in this manner cannot be an easy one, especially because it is often thankless. Even though I always begin as a skeptic, I'm convinced that this board represents the will of our parents and students as well as possible, and acts in the best interest of all stakeholders in the district. In this new year, our board will continue its operations, striving to improve the quality of education and life for the children who have considered the Cherry Hill Public Schools to be a second home. I expect that outside of these remarks today, the primary form of appreciation you'll receive is in the form of smiles and public approval of your actions. I hope that can be enough. Thank you.
Good evening, Board of Education members. On behalf of Cherry Hill West, I would like to extend my utmost gratitude for your hard work and dedication to our school district. It is extremely hard to find such intelligent and passionate members of society to take on the tasks that you manage every single day. And words cannot express how lucky and grateful we are for your devotion to all 19 of our Cherry Hill schools, and your determination does not go unnoticed, so thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yes, thank you very much. Next on our agenda, we're going to first go into our action agenda. And first on our action agenda, I'm going to ask Mrs. Seidel to move curriculum and instruction.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. That's going to be a tough act to follow. Thank you. The superintendent recommends and I move the following. Number 1, approval of attendance at conferences and workshops for the 2017-2018 school year. And item number 2, approval of Michelle Giambrone research. Do I have a second? Mrs. Judge. And one quick note regarding the Michelle Giambrone research. I was going to cover this a little later, but just want to make sure that you're aware. Mrs. Giambrone presented her master's degree work to the Curriculum and Instruction Committee meeting last week. and it is in the area of the effectiveness of close reading for students with learning disabilities. And the CNAC committee agreed to move this request forward for board action on the special action agenda tonight. Do we have any questions or discussion? Okay, seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Judge,
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpellino,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tomlinson,
Yes.
Dr. Wong,
Yes.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Seidel. And next, I will be moving the BNF agenda. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. One, financial reports. Do I have a second? Mrs. Judge, any questions? If not, Mrs. Sugars.
Mr. Goodwin,
Yes.
Mrs. Judge,
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel,
Have to abstain with respect to CDW on the bill list. Yes to the rest.
Mrs. Scarpellino,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
I need to abstain from Beata Home Health. Yes to the rest.
Mr. Tomlinson,
Abstaining from Bancroft Neurohealth. Yes to the remainder.
Dr. Wong,
Yes.
Okay, next on the agenda, we have human resources, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Judge to move that agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, termination of employment certificated. Number 2, termination of employment non-certificated. Number 3, appointment certificated. Number 4, appointments non-certificated. Number 5, assignment salary change non-certificated. Number 6, other compensation certificated. Number 7 should be it should be stated contract rescission and replacement. And we have a number 8 on the pink sheet. We have an addition to number 4, and we have a number 8, which is other appointments, school safety specialist. Do I have a second? Mrs. Matlack. Before we go into if there's any questions or whatever, I would like to read something regarding number 7, the contract rescission and replacement for Dr. Malash. So as a reminder, we voted on November 14th to move forward to seek Executive County Superintendent approval for the superintendent's contract. We have received that approval, and I am pleased to put forth the 5-year replacement contract of Dr. Malash's contract on our agenda this evening. This will be effective for the period July 1st, 2017 through June 30th, 2022. I am personally very happy to move this forward as chair of HR. We have a lot of work to do with the Cherry Hill 2020 Clear Vision for the Future plan that we supported on December 19th, along with the upcoming board referendum on October 2nd of this year. I am very pleased to have Dr. Malash at the helm to steer us through all of the work to be done. As an aside, I have been on this board long enough to experience 2 superintendent searches. Not only is it a huge time commitment, the selection of candidates can be very sparse. Lastly, the National Publication Education Week has chosen Dr. Malash as a leader to learn from in 2018. We have the best of the best right here in Cherry Hill, and we do not want to lose him. Are there any questions on numbers 1 through 8 on the HR agenda, or any other comments that you would like to state? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Judge,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Matlack,
I echo Mrs. Judge's sentiments regarding the superintendent contract, and I am voting yes to all.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Scarpellino,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tomlinson,
Yes to all.
Dr. Wong,
No to item 7, yes to the rest.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes to all. Next on the, thank you, Mrs. Judge, and I also want to say I do echo your comments, and I really do appreciate Dr. Malash as well. And next on the agenda, we have policy and legislation, and I'm going to ask Mrs. Scarpellino to move that for us.
Certainly, Mr. Goodwin. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, approval of harassment, intimidation, bullying, investigation decisions. And number 2, we do have a green sheet, which is a waiver of policy 2431, athletic competition. Do I have a second? Mrs. Seidel, are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Scarpellino,
Yes.
Mrs. Judge,
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack,
Yes to all.
Mrs. Seidel,
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz,
Yes.
Mr. Tomlinson,
Yes to all.
Dr. Wong,
Yes.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes. And we don't have any items on the action agenda for strategic planning. So now we're going to move to our board working session, and we're going to start off with curriculum and instruction with Mrs. Seidel.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Our last Curriculum and Instruction Committee meeting was held on January 2nd at 7 p.m. As always, we had a packed agenda. First item we discussed was park testing schedules for the 2018 upcoming year, and Dr. Mahan presented the park schedule for high school, middle school, and elementary school levels. The middle school level this year will have a more condensed testing schedule, which is similar to the high school level, and that made everybody in the room very happy. Dr. Mahan also presented the district master assessment calendar, and both the park schedule and the master assessment calendar will be posted on the district website if it isn't already, but all of you received it in your Friday packet for review. Item number 2 was park practice test modules. Dr. Mahan also provided information about park testing module times and discussed and presented the park platform tutorial and online lookalike assessments for our children. This will help expose them to the format prior to the actual park testing. The next item, Mrs. DiGiacomo presented the dates for the 4-week and 5-week extended school year program for classified students requiring the service per their IEP. This program is over the summer. She reviewed the budget development and staffing needs using the summer of 2017 as the basis for the budget and staffing needs. Ms. Smith then presented the plan for the summer Title I program, also known as Camp Thomas Paine. Again, Ms. Smith presented background information as well as budget development, and student participation was high in both of these programs during the summer of 2017, so that's good news. Next up, Dr. Mahan discussed the meeting she and Dr. Malash attended regarding dual credit opportunities at Stockton University. This opportunity is for students enrolled in Holocaust Genocide course and African American Studies course. The rate is $400 to take the course to earn college credits, and a representative will be visiting both schools in the near future regarding the implementation of this dual credit program. This is really exciting. This is, you've heard a lot lately about dual credit programs that we are offering, so it's really exciting opportunities for our children. Next up, Mr. Reardon, principal of Stockton Elementary School, presented the books currently being used as a book study and how they relate to district goals regarding character education and cultural proficiency. The books are Kobe Yamada's books, What to Do with a Problem and What to Do with an Idea, some of Dr. Malash's favorites. The teaching lessons have been developed by Mr. Reardon and the staff, and I have a packet with very detailed lesson plans in here if you're interested. Teaching lessons have been developed from the book study, which supports the school's designation as a National School of Character. So an exciting program at Stockton Elementary. I already talked to you guys about the effectiveness of close reading of expository text on reading comprehension study from Ms. Giambrone. Next, we discussed the high school science sequence. Dr. Mahan and Mr. Goldthorpe gave a follow-up about the comprehensive science assessment that 11th grade students will now take. It is called the New Jersey Student Learning Assessment for Science. And as a preparation for that test and to ensure that our children have all of the information necessary, there's a proposed sequence change for science, and the proposed sequence is 9th graders biology, which we're all already aware of, 10th graders chemistry, and 11th grade physics. So there were some questions raised regarding the alignment with 11th grade physics and math, and Mr. Goldthorpe spoke about the alignment of prerequisite topics in math that would support student success in physics. And this information will be disseminated at the course of study nights at all the middle schools. And just to be clear, this sequence makes physics a class that all students will need to take. Next, we discussed the STEP summer camp. Ms. Rockhill and Mr. Klitz presented the summer enrichment camp program for the summer of 2018. Revenue and camper numbers have increased while the cost of participation has not increased in many years. Mr. Klitz proposed an increase in tuition to provide more services because the camp will no longer take place on Fridays. It's going to a 4-day model. There were some different options regarding restructuring the program to fit a 4-day model. Those options were presented, and those options range in both cost and program offerings. Ms. Rockhill and Mr. Klitz will give an update on the number of students registered for the program at the April the April Committee of the Whole meeting. And we had one brief public comment, and it was sort of a thank you for everything that we're doing, so it was a positive. And does anybody have any questions or discussion on any of the items? Mrs. Scarpellino.
On the science assessment for 11th grade, what class does that start with?
This class, current 11th graders.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
So I understand the need for the realignment of the science curriculum and maybe some math support. Or I guess, are we doing anything to support these students and then any students before this realignment happens?
So it's my understanding that this first exam is really a baseline, but I'm going to let either Dr. Mahan or Dr. Malash give you a little more detail because we did ask that exact question at our meeting.
That question was asked at the meeting, and we were actually just informed of the new assessment. So there is a switch from the NJBCT to now this new comprehensive science assessment. And this year will just be almost like a field test for the state to get some data to make sure that the questions are relevant, statistically significant, et cetera. Next year will be the baseline year. So every student that takes the assessment next year, that will be the baseline for the district. And then the following year will be the year, so our current freshmen will be the year that it will count and we will get results back. We will not get any results or information back from the students who take the assessment this year.
Right, and I'm assuming when we inform parents and stuff about this, because I know I have a nervous 11th grader who would probably lose his mind when he hears this if he thought it counted, so I'm sure there will be others out there.
There will be additional information shared about this assessment when we start to roll out information regarding the park assessment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else? Mr. Goodwin.
So is this replacing the biology test?
Yes.
Okay.
Anybody else? Okay, back to you, Mr. Goodwin.
All right, thank you very much. Next, I'm going to go through the committee meeting for BNF. We covered a few items for BNF. First of all, we talked about site improvements. There's going to be site improvements in the budget for the remainder of the 2017 school year. And there's going to be work being done at East, West, Kilmer, I should say, and Carusi. There's also going to be sports kind of improvements at Rosa, Carusi, Kilmer, East, Beck. There's going to be exterior. Actually, those are exterior doors. We had the opportunity to see pictures of all these old doors, original doors. So a lot of the exterior doors are going to be replaced at Rosa, Carusi, Kilmer, East, and Beck. There's going to be also some locker replacements. There's going to be concrete work done. There's each one is almost. I can't say all the schools, but there's going to be work being done at most of the schools. There's going to be canopy replacements. There at Barton, the crawl space work is actually going to be starting soon in terms of handling the issues related to the floor and the crawl space at Barton. The east wall replacement is still moving forward, and as I mentioned, there's going to be locker replacements at Beck Middle School, and I believe that was most of the work that's being done there. Some other projects coming up would be some roofing projects and Barclay generator project, exterior lighting at Barclay as well, and HVAC at Kilmore. So we talked about all the different various projects coming up. That was our primary discussion, and then finally we talked about there are some additional donations that would be accepted, and we'll see those in our agenda at our action meeting. So that's majority of stuff we talked about. A lot of work going on. Any questions? Yes.
At the meeting, I was not so sure that when Lynn Sugars was talking about having 2 schools installed with the camera systems, and so that project will be part of the referendum or will be part of the regular, say, expenditure.
So one of the primary focuses of the referendum will be implementing some of the security measures that we put in at Barclay at our other schools. However, pending what our budget looks like and what our capital projects look like for next year, you know, if we can start implementing that in some of our schools where that project can be easily done as it was at Barclay, you know, we're looking at that as a possibility for part of our 18-19 budget as opposed to waiting for the referendum.
Any other questions? Okay. So that's our BNF, and I'm now going to turn it over to Mrs. Judge to discuss anything she can about human resources.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Of course, it's going to be brief since everything that we talk about is confidential. So we met last Wednesday, January 3rd. As we stated earlier, we briefly discussed the superintendent's contract, a few other agenda items, and we also received a very brief negotiations update. And our next HR meeting is Tuesday, February 6th at 5 o'clock. Any questions? Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Goodwin.
Okay. All right. And now we're going to go to policy and legislation with Mrs. Scarpolino.
Thank you. The Policy and Legislation Committee met on Tuesday, January 2nd at 6 o'clock. We had lots and lots of policies to discuss. Initially we were talking about just discussional or informational policies. There's potential changes to the HIB policy and regulations, and due to the significant regulation changes at the state level, there will be a policy review and revisions to the HIB policy beginning at the February Policy and Legislation Committee. A lot of it having to do with our out-of-district placement students and when we are or aren't responsible for investigating HIBs. Not exclusively, but a lot of it having to do with that. We also discussed policy 169.02, which is board member use of social networks. This was new. It's a new policy that's being recommended from Strauss Esme, but the policy was tabled by the committee for further discussion to determine if it's actually necessary to adopt it, as it's not a mandatory policy, and we're not sure. Part of the discussion was, is it really addressing anything new, or, you know, is this covered in other places, or is it common sense kind of thing? So we're tabling that for now. Next, we talked about policy 3437 having to do with military leave, and also policy 4437, both of them having, one having to do with certificated staff, one having to do with non-certificated staff. And both of these policies were have been revised to comply with some new mandated language, and will be moved forward for a first reading at the January 23rd. Is it January 23rd? 2018 Board of Action meeting. And next we talked about policy 5516.01, which is student tracking devices. This again is a new possible policy we talked about. The policy is not being moved forward at this time. This policy is not mandatory, and there's not enough cause to warrant further discussion or adoption. Part of what we talked about was that we already have policies covering things like recording, that exists, that cover much of what this policy would cover, but also given that it was so specific to certain types of devices and technology changes weekly, we weren't sure if it made sense to adopt it, so we're not moving it forward at this time. Next, we were talking about policy and regulations for action. Regulation 5460.1, high school transcripts. This is a new mandatory policy, and it was revised. This regulation clarifies the issue of sending student discipline records to colleges and university, and the district will only send student discipline records to colleges and universities at the request of the parent or the adult student. So we won't send them if the schools ask for it, only if the parent or student who's an adult asks for it. Policy 7440, school district security, and regulation 7440, the school district security. These are both, again, mandatory policies that were revised. They were updated to include legal requirements that the superintendent of schools must designate a school administrator as the school safety specialist for the school district, with the superintendent with supervision and oversight responsibilities for all school safety and security personnel and school safety and policy procedures in the district, which was on the agenda, and Ms. Sugars was appointed as that. And again, because it had to be a certificated staff member. Policy 7441, which had to do, and regulation 7441, electronic surveillance in school buildings and on school grounds. This, again, mandatory policy that was revised. The policy and regulation were revised to incorporate the requirements of the new law requiring school districts with at least one school building that is equipped with video surveillance equipment capable of streaming live video wirelessly to a remote location to enter into a memorandum of understanding with local law enforcement, providing the authorities to the capacity to activate equipment and view live stream video. We are in compliance with Barkley for that policy already, and we will have the MOU signed at the end of this month, I believe it is, with the Cherry Hill Police. Next was policy 8507, breakfast offer versus service, another mandatory revised policy. It was revised to incorporate language regarding additional details on what food items a student must select in order for the meal to be eligible for a federal reimbursement. And this additional language had been mandated by the New Jersey Department of Agriculture, so we're just making sure we're complying with that. Policy 8630 and regulation 8630 having to do with bus driver and bus aid responsibilities in emergency school bus procedures. Again, both mandatory, both revised. They were revised to have the word employer replace Board of Education, as both the board and school bus contractors have the same responsibilities in the bus driver training requirements. And basically, if we contract with bus companies, they hire the drivers, they're responsible for training the drivers. If we hire the aides, we'd be responsible for training the aides, and they have to comply with the act. Next, we had policies for second reading and adoption. These were from the B&F committee and were approved for first reading at the November 28th, 2017 action meeting. And the policies are, you have the list of them, but service to non-public school students, long-range facilities planning, educational adequacy of capital projects, site selection and acquisition, school closing, disposition of property, and unmanned aircraft systems, which are otherwise known as drones. Policy, that one is policy. The drone policy is 7481, and that one has been created to provide the opportunity for use of an unmanned aircraft system for educational purposes after approval from the Board of Ed. All the other policies that I listed for second reading had been reviewed and vetted by the Buildings and Finance Committee, and all the revisions to the language in those policies stemmed directly from changes in the code. And then there was one person in the audience, and we did have public comment from that person, and that was pretty much it. Any questions? Mrs. Judge.
I'm not finding it here in the hard copies, but I guess I should have asked this question earlier, but it did, when you stated it, it reminded me of my question regarding high school transcripts and the regulation regarding sending student discipline reports to colleges and universities. Do colleges and universities ever ask for this, or have they asked for it? Do we know the reasoning for the need for this regulation? And what do you think if the parent doesn't approve of it or ask it, what's the outcome?
So,
I will try to be more clear, but you can start with your whatever you want.
Mrs. Judge, very rarely do colleges ask for discipline, right? So on the new common application, the kids have to indicate if they've ever been suspended from school, right? So they have to self-allocate about yes or no, and then be able to explain what the situation is. In all the years that I worked at the high school, the only time that I ever recall schools asking for discipline records were the military academies, and then kids, honestly, when they were in college, either in graduate school or if they're going to do internships with a branch of the government, and then they would come and do an investigation, but the kids would have already signed off and they would come see us. My expectation is if a college requests it and the parent of the adult child refuses to send it, I'm going to guess that the college will take that information in their decision-making process.
Thank you. Thank you for understanding my question, because that certainly was not stated clearly. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question. For any those type of records, if not college, but beyond college, say a government wants to know whether the kid, had this type of record, should we, supply? I mean, give the record or not?
We do not. We require either an authorization from the former student or a court order or subpoena to release it. We will not just release it on a request from someone. If it's a criminal investigation, we do get those occasionally. Those we do get subpoenas from the government agency that's doing the investigation.
Any other questions? Mr. Goins?
Continuing down that vein, so what kind of disciplinary records would be in the students? I mean, what kind of things would be in there? Just suspensions, or, I mean, what, like, if they were accused of bullying, or what kind of things are in their record?
Well, the bullying is not a disciplinary record, right? So the bullying is literally a finding of HIB, but it's not necessarily a disciplinary record. Typically, the disciplinary record, and as kids graduate from the high school, the majority of kids do not have discipline records when they graduate from high school, just as an aside. Detention, suspension, that kind of stuff would be listed on there. We manage it all electronically, right? Yeah, cutting class.
These refer to as, I never got a white card.
That could be it, right? I never got a white card, right? Kids will still talk about white cards even though they're not really issued as white cards.
Okay.
Anybody else? Back to you, Mr. Goodwin.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Scarpolino. And next on the agenda, we have Mrs. Matlack to discuss strategic planning.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We met last Wednesday, January 3rd at 7 o'clock, and we had one item on our agenda, and that was the referendum project update. Mrs. Sugars and Mr. Middleton provided us an update on the continued review of the prioritization of the projects for the referendum slated for October 2nd, 2018. The process began when Mr. Middleton met with principals during the development of the long-range facilities plan. Subsequent to that, Mr. Middleton, Mrs. Sugars, Mr. Bart, and Mr. Carter did school visits during the months of November and December. The goal is to present the complete list of projects to committees on March 6th and the full board on March 13th, 2018. Project applications need to be submitted to the state by the end of March 2018, and the board will need to authorize the resolution in June or July of 2018. Projects that affect the health and safety of students are being given priority, with security projects at the top of the list. This would include security vestibules, cameras, and swipe card access to buildings, and may include main office reconfigurations or new construction in some buildings, such as Hart and Stockton. Next on the list is a full and partial roofing replacements, replacement of curtain walls, masonry repairs, the replacement of fire detection systems, and asbestos abatement at Carusi Middle School. In terms of instructional spaces, the list includes small group instruction rooms, toilet room upgrades, the expansion and/or renovation of all-purpose rooms, and science lab renovations at Carusi and West. Additional infrastructure projects would include HVAC replacements, lintel replacements, plumbing replacements, and ceiling replacements, including lighting. Hard surface type projects would include curbs, sidewalks, and paving, storm drainage, expansion of parking, and building accessibility. Community spaces type projects would include gymnasium renovations, locker room upgrades, upgrades at the East Auditorium, and athletic field upgrades. While evaluating projects for the referendum, many smaller projects are being categorized as capital reserve or maintenance projects and will aid in developing a comprehensive multi-year capital project program for the district. And Mr. Goodwin touched on some of that when he gave his BNF report and talked about some of the capital projects that have been, are in the works and that have been floated around as possible inclusions. Some of those smaller, relatively smaller projects will be included in a comprehensive capital projects program. And we had no public comment at the meeting. Does anybody have any comments or questions? Mrs. Schultz.
At the same time that we're having all these discussions about the plans, and are we having simultaneous discussions about what we might do if it doesn't pass?
Yes. So the discussion about where we are moving forward, it's all part of it. What will happen October 2nd, 2018? The expectation is that we'll put it out for referendum and it will pass. But part of the discussions leading up to that is if it doesn't pass, what are the next steps? Absolutely.
Any other questions or comments? Dr. Wong.
Yeah. Thanks. Any chance that this year we're gonna get more additional funding, extra funding from the state, or should we putting in effort, for some kind of actions towards fair funding, in the school district? And together with other neighboring school districts and so on.
I'll let Mrs. Sugars talk a little bit about the funding. The funding is always up in the air until we get the actual numbers that come from the state. We have a new governor who will be sworn in pretty soon, who will then ultimately address the state and talk about what it is that he would like to build into his budget. The issue of fair funding in Cherry Hill has a long history. In fact, there's a fair funding committee that grew as an offshoot from Zone PTA, which actually grew from the work that was initiated by the Board of Education. Right, so Cherry Hill Fair Funding started as a Board of Education work. It was ultimately the legislators that said, we're tired of hearing from you as board members. You really need to get citizens and the public involved. And that's where Zone PTA started to become involved and where it grew as an offshoot. As a district, we received $1,050,000 in additional funding for 2017 to 2018. In actual dollars, more than the majority of the other districts throughout the state. Along with Mrs. Wilson and I met with Lou Greenwald, one of our assembly folks, back in the fall with a couple of members of the Fair Funding Committee. I'm in regular contact with Lou Greenwald and Pam Lampett. I meet with Jim Beach, who's our state senator, on a monthly basis. And funding is always on the top of where we are. I expect that ultimately there will be changes in how public schools are funded in the state of New Jersey. Right now it's a lot of hypothetical discussion that's coming from the legislative leaders until it's actually put into place. The next 6 months will be relatively telling in terms of what's going on. But we meet with the legislators all the time. I always, we encourage the public when I do the community meetings that I have In fact, Missy Lang, who is one of the co-chairs of the committee, was at Russell Night with us on Saturday morning. We have handouts about fair funding, but we talk about it all the time. The more people from the community that can become involved in the fair funding push from Cherry Hill, the better off we are. You know, the legislators, as we've met them over the last few years, committed to supporting us. You know, whether it was Lou Greenwald, Pam Lampett, Jim Beach, or when Steve Sweeney, who's the Senate President, came down, and honestly ultimately followed through, you know, with the additional funding that came through last summer. We need to continue to see that, you know, going through. But right now, it's a guess, right, Lynn?
Yeah, there's always a lot of speculation this time of year as we start our budget process about what our funding is going to look like. And I think there's even more speculation with a new governor coming in about what it will look like and what that will mean for us. So the only thing I have been told at this point is not to count on the additional funding that we received last year. And generally, as we're developing our budgets, we budget flat funding because that is what it has been over the past couple of years. I also think that as the discussions about what's happening to the pension program heats up, that will may or may not have an effect on our funding as well. I think the state views the funding that they provide to the pension program as a form of aid to the schools, and I don't think the public sees it that way because it doesn't affect our bottom line. But the legislators see it as another component of our state aid. So I think that. You know, that it'll be interesting to see what happens. We've already been alerted that there may be a delay in our budget process this year because usually when a new governor comes in, they allow him some extra time to look at aid and the budget and things like that. So, you know, we're going to go with flat funding for right now and hope for the best. And if we're pleasantly surprised, that would be wonderful. But, you know, we've been doing this a long time, so we're going to stick with flat funding for now.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Okay, that's my report. Mr. Goodwin, back to you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Matlack. And on that point, I do want to reiterate that I know that several of the board members, Mrs. Matlack, Mrs. Judge, myself, other board members have met with our legislators on numerous occasions and asked them, and as Dr. Malash indicated, they said, well, they want to hear from the people. So that has been an ongoing thing, and I think as a board, we will continue to engage with our legislators and hopefully as a community, we are asking communities to also do that because we would like to get to fair funding. I don't know when that will happen, but anyway, thank you, Ms. Matlack. At this point in time, are there any new items or any new items that anyone would like to bring up? Okay. If not, I'm gonna. This is time for our second public comment section. If you'd like to speak, you can speak. Please come to the microphone and speak clearly your name and address. Each speaker is given a maximum of 3 minutes to speak. The timer light will be green at the beginning of your 3 minutes. When the timer turns yellow, you have 30 seconds left. When the timer turns red, your time is up. And you can speak on any topic on the agenda or any other topic. Does anyone have any items to bring forward? Okay. If not, then do I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Judge and Mrs. Schultz. Thank you. Have a good evening.